Hi class! Welcome to geometry. Did you have a nice summer? That's great! Alright, so to start things off, I want to review some essential arithmetic topics or arithmetic topics. There's a few topics that you learn in elementary or middle school that are very important when you come to high school, but I find that a lot of students still don't have a grasp on them. So we're going to review them to start this class. So as I mentioned, the learning target for today is to review essential arithmetic topics. The scale, you're a 3 if you can complete essential arithmetic problems and leave them in the correct form. We're going to be talking about leaving things in the correct form today. You're a 2 if you can complete essential arithmetic problems but have trouble leaving them in the correct form. So you can do them just fine, but then you put them in a form that isn't the greatest answer. 1, you can complete some essential arithmetic problems. You can do some of them, but not others, whether or not you can put them in the correct form. And 0, you cannot complete essential arithmetic problems. So with the scale at the end of this video, at the very end, if you will go back to the beginning of this video and just at the top of your notes put what you are for the scale. So at the end of this video, do you think you're a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0? And just put it on so I can see that. All right, let's get started.
Alright, so first we're going to talk about correct ways to write answers. A lot of times students will get answers and they'll put them in ways that are not ideal. So there are specific ways we want to write answers, and then there are other ways that we shouldn't write those answers. So I'm going to talk about both those, both correct ways to write answers, and I'm also going to mention incorrect ways to write answers. So let's start off saying we have the answer we got was 6 over 10. It's not a correct way to write an answer because it's not fully reduced. If we write it as a fraction, we want a fully reduced fraction. So 6 over 10, you think, what can 6 over 10 both be divided by? What can 6 and 10 both be divided by? Well, they can be both divided by 2. So we divide them both by 2. And we get 3 over 5. This is a correct way to write an answer. A lot of people want to turn those into decimals. 3 over 5 as a decimal is 0.6. Again, another correct way to write the answer. I prefer fractions, but if you want to write it as a decimal, that's fine. If you write 0.6, that is also acceptable. So either of those three ways, 3/5, 0.6, or 0.6 is fine. Just to note, an incorrect way to write the answer would be 0.60, because that 0 at the end doesn't need to be there. You get rid of any zeros that don't need to be there. So the 0 at the end would not be correct. So this would be an incorrect way to write the answer. Now let's say we have the fraction 12 over 9 as an answer. So again, this can be reduced. They can both be divided by 3. 12 and 9 can both be divided by 3. So we divide them both by 3, and we get 4/3. This is a correct way to write the answer. It's known as an improper fraction, where the bigger number is on top of the smaller number. That's okay. I know in elementary or middle school you may have been taught you want to turn things into mixed numbers. You can, and we'll talk about how to do that, but I am perfectly fine with you leaving it as an improper fraction. So what if we want to turn it into a mixed number? Well, it's 4/3. So 3/3 is 1. So we look at how many 3's make up 4. Well, just 1. So 3 goes into 4 one time. And then what's left over when we do 4 minus 3? Well, 1. And then that's still in thirds. The denominator stays the same. So 4/3 is the same as 1 and 1/3. So that's perfectly fine for an answer. Now what if you want to change it to a decimal? Well, that gets a little tricky here, because a lot of people would look into their calculator and they would want to say, put in what their calculator says. The correct answer would be 1.3 repeating. So this is a correct way to write it. That line over the 3 says it's a repeating decimal. It repeats forever. Now, incorrect ways to write this. So it's not equal to 1.3. It's not just 1.3, it's 1.3 repeating. So this is an incorrect way to write the answer. It's also not whatever your calculator says, which is probably 1.333333333. Just because that's what your calculator says does not mean it's right. Your calculator rounds. You should not. Don't round unless I tell you to. So this is also an incorrect way to write the answer. Alright, let's say we have -2 and 10 over 15. So this one's a mixed number, but again, it's not reduced. 10 and 15 can both be divided by 5. So we divide them both by 5. And we get -2, because the -2 stays. It's just -2. That's not being divided. Only the fraction is. So 10 divided by 5 is 2, and 15 divided by 5 is 3. So -2 and 2/3. So this is a mixed number, so this is a correct way to write the answer. Another correct way to write the answer is as an improper fraction. So to turn a mixed number to an improper fraction, we take the whole number, multiply it by the denominator, then add that number to the numerator, leaving the denominator the same. So right away, the denominator stays the same. It's going to be thirds. But how many thirds? So we take the 2, leave the negative alone for the moment, and multiply that by 3. 2 times 3 is 6, and then plus the numerator, 2, is 8. So we have 8/3. But now there's a negative here. So we have -8/3. So -8 over 3, that is a correct way to write the answer. Another quick change, but another correct way to write the answer is -8/3, making the whole fraction negative. All that means is the negative goes to one of these numbers, but not both. Another way to write the answer is as a decimal. So back to, it's still -2 and then 2/3. So -2 and 2/3 is 0.6 repeating. 0.6 repeating. Now you might say, well, my calculator says this, 2.6666667. That must not be repeating because there's a 7 at the end. Again, your calculator rounds, and you don't want to do that. So, while this is the correct way to write it, this is not correct. Again, other ways I've seen this written is 2.6 or 2.7. 2.7 is rounded, 2.6 is just getting rid of all the other sixes, which isn't even rounded correctly, but I've seen it many times. So these are also not correct ways to write it. And then going back to the fraction thing, where the negative goes. You also cannot write it as -8 over -3. That would not be correct because you've got two negatives instead of just one. Even though this negative goes to the whole thing, it only goes to one of the numbers. So this is not okay. 8 over -3, while technically correct, is not a way we write it. So the negative can go to the 3, but we don't leave it as a final answer this way. We would bring the negative up to the 8 or put it out front. So again, also an incorrect way to write the answer. Now, if we have 20 over 4, remember fraction signs are just division signs. So this we can really just say 20 divided by 4. Well, 20 divided by 4 is 5. So this is a correct way to write the answer. Now, other ways I've seen it, I've seen people do 5 over 1. Again, it's not fully reduced because it's left as a fraction, but it doesn't need to be. So this is not a correct way to write it. Also, people may try to put it as a decimal, like 5.0. Again, the point 0 is not needed. So again, not a correct way to write it. Alright, now let's talk about adding and subtracting fractions. So, the key you need whenever adding or subtracting fractions is a common denominator. The number on the bottom has to be the same in both fractions. So, here we have 3 over 5 plus 4 over 5. Well, that's easy enough. They're both over 5, so we just add the numerators. 3 plus 4 is 7 over 5. So that is the answer. You can leave it just like that. If you want to, there are people that like to put it as a mixed number or decimal. If you really want to, you can. Those would be 2 and 2/5 or 2.4. So all three of these are correct answers. You only need to write one of them, but I will accept any of them. Now here, we have 2 over 3 plus 3 over 4. We need a common denominator. What number can both 3 and 4 multiply into that are the same number? Well, the easiest way is 3 times 4 is 12. So 3 and 4 can both multiply into 12. So what do we have to multiply 3 by to get 12? 4. What we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. What do we have to multiply 4 by to get 12? 3. What we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So that will give us 8 over 12 plus 9 over 12. And then we have common denominators, so we can add them straight out. 8 plus 9 is 17 over 12. And that's your answer. Again, if you want to, 1 and 5/12, 1.416 with just the 6 repeating. You put your line over everything that repeats, and in this case, just the 6 repeats. So these are the correct ways you can write this answer. 17 over 12, which is the way I would always write it, but 1 and 5 over 12, or 1.416 repeating, with it just the 6 repeating. Alright, and then the last one, 2 over 14 minus 3 over 21. Well, you could say, well, 14 times 21 and get that for our common denominator, but that's a really big number, And also, you always want the least common denominator, the smallest common denominator, so you won't have to reduce as much at the end. What number can 14 and 21 both multiply into? Again, that might be tough to figure out. Let's think about what gives us 14 and 21. 14 is 2 times 7. 21 is 3 times 7. So if we want to have 14 and 21 be the same number, we just need to multiply this by 3 and this by 2. And then we get the same number. Times 3 times 3 times 2 times 2. So that'll give us 6 over 42 minus 6 over 42. Now this is actually pretty easy. 6 over 42 minus 6 over 42 is 0. And there's no other correct way to write that. It's just plain 0. Some people might say 6 over 42, 0 over 42, but 0 over 42 can be reduced more. It's just 0. Alright, now we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing fractions. So when you're multiplying fractions, it's much easier than adding or subtracting. All you have to do is multiply straight across. So 2 times 4 is 8, and 3 times 5 is 15. I'm not going to do what I've been doing, showing you all the possible answers. 8 over 15. That's really the correct answer. You can put the others if you want, but I'm not going to spend the time on it. Next, we can do 3 times 35 over 10 times 12. However, there is a shortcut, or rather, something you can do. It's called cross division. Since these are going to multiply anyway, at the end we're going to have to reduce. But instead of figuring out what 3 times 35 is and 10 times 12 is, even though the bottom's rather easy, we can cross-reduce. So we can reduce the fractions first, but diagonally. So, 3 over 12. Well, 3 and 12 can both be divided by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So it makes those the new numbers there. We can do the same thing with 10 and 35. They can both be divided by 5. So 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 10 divided by 5 is 2. So now we've got 1 over 2 times 7 over 4, and it's the same thing we just reduced. So 1 times 7 is 7, and 2 times 4 is 8. So we have 7 over 8. And then finally, 6 over 7 divided by 8 over 9. Before we do anything else, division is just multiplying by the reciprocal. What that means is this is the same thing as saying 6 over 7, the first one stays, multiplied by the reciprocal. These flipped. 9 over 8. So division is just multiplying by the reciprocal. And then multiply. Can't do any cross division here. Well, you can do 6 and 8. So cross division with 6 and 8, we can do quickly. 6 and 8 can both be divided by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, 8 divided by 2 is 4. But 9 and 7 definitely don't go into each other. They have nothing that can divide out. So, makes it a little bit easier. 3 times 9 is 27, and 7 times 4 is 28. Now let's talk about rounding. So, with rounding, never round unless I tell you to. If you remember anything else, never round unless I tell you to. So, in this case, I am saying round 1 over 7 to the nearest hundredth. So, if you put 1 over 7 into your calculator, or at least what I get in my calculator, is 0.142857143. And I actually even know that they rounded this last number. This last number was supposed to be a 2 and it continued, because this is actually 142857 repeating. So it's these numbers repeating. However, this is what your calculator gives you. You want to round to the nearest hundredth. So round, and I always like to put this because it means about equal to. It's not the same. It's not straight equal. It's about equal to. And then we round. The nearest hundredth is this number here. The second digit over. Goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths, so on. Okay? So if we want to the nearest hundredth, we're looking at this number here, the 4. So we want to go up to that number. However, we look at the digit after it. We look at this one here. If it is 4 or less, we keep this the same. If it's 5 or above, we round this number up 1. So if this was 5 or above, we would round this to a 5. However, it's 2, which is less than 5, so it stays the same. So this is rounded to 0.14. And now round 2/13 to the nearest thousandth. Again, 2 over 13 in your calculator, or at least mine, says 0.153846154. Nearest thousandth, that's the third decimal place. So that's this one right here. And we're looking at the next one over to see what we do to that number. Well, it's 5 or bigger, because it's 8. So that means this is approximately equal to 0.154. We round up. Now you may say, oh, this is easy. I've seen this way back in elementary school, or I've done this so many times. Why are you telling me again? So many students have trouble with rounding. It may be just a simple mistake that they don't think of, but when told to round, you need to know what to round to. Now time for the sponge activity. So what the sponge activity is, and I've probably already mentioned this in class, but what it is I give you a few problems, and if you get them all right, you get a bonus point on the next test. And they're problems based on this lesson. You do them before class. So you watch the video, you do these problems, and then you send them in with your notes. So I've got 4 problems here, and make sure I want you to leave them in the correct form that we talked about. So the first 3, they don't tell you to round, so don't round. Last one does tell you to round, so round your answer correctly. So first one is 5 over 6 plus 1 over 9. Second is 9 over 2 times 7 over 15. Third one is 1 over 8 divided by 13 over 4. And the last one, round 1 over 16 to the nearest tenth. Alright, that's it for this lesson. Please make sure to take notes on everything, the entire lesson. Don't forget to go back to the beginning and rank yourself based on where you think you are. Do it after completing the sponge, though. Take a picture of everything, including the sponge. Submit it all to Google Classroom. And have a good night.